I speak today to Ricardo Meléndez-Ortiz. Ricardo is the co-founder and was the long-serving founding director of the ICTSD, the International Center for Trade and Sustainable Development. And I'm going to ask him today what he thinks the future of the World Trade Organization, the WTO, might look like in a post-COVID world.
WTO in itself is, on one hand, not only an institution, but an idea. It embeds in a very big way the notion of liberal internationalism. That comes from Wilson and the beginning of the past century. That the notion that economies could integrate to global markets, to free trade, through liberal economic policies, that will then foster liberal political systems. The WTO doesn't live in isolation, doesn't exist in isolation. It is part of a much broader ecosystem. It grows out of a process of negotiations, which means it's not a perfect design. It is a complex system, which is the result of compromises. Okay, so we have 25 years where the WTO performs, as I said, essentially that role of avoiding power politics in the conduct of commercial relations, and that's absolutely critical, but also 25 years in which many of the fundamental issues are not really satisfactorily resolved. COVID adds just one more layer of challenges, but a very fundamental one again, a very vital one. It challenges the system to maintain, again, a healthy global economy. It also challenges the system to really now, going forward, address its shortcomings. And it's not just about public health. There are other issues that have become unpalatable when we think about globalization. So I think the best principle going forward on any reform, any update of WTO is do no harm.
A new Director General of the WTO is about to be appointed. If you were to be that new Director General, what do you think should be the priorities for anyone coming into that job?
I don't underestimate the complexity and the difficulty of whoever has to respond to this question. Politically, that Director General has to have as an absolute priority to bring the membership behind a shared vision for the organization and for the system. Now, that's theoretically easy to say. How do you herd these cats in a bag to really come behind a shared vision? That's number one question. Number two, you need to really understand what has worked in the past 25 years and what hasn't worked. So we have to raise ambition. And my hope, going back to your question on COVID, is that COVID, this moment, helps us raise ambition.
As we look at the world after COVID, what do you think is the one thing that the WTO should continue doing, and maybe the one thing that it should not continue doing?
The one thing that it does good is to ensure that there is no discrimination and a good compliance with the market access conditions that have been negotiated among countries. That's essential. That's 101 for the system. Something it cannot continue to do is, for instance, apply rules. Let me give you specific examples. Subsidies, which are not really grounded on any economics, but even more importantly, on policy objectives. The COVID crisis has put on the table how complex value chains are and how incredibly affected they are by rules, regulation, non-tariff barriers, etc. The kind of things that the WTO should be good at knocking down, but knocking them down for a greater good.
What should be the goal of the World Trade Organization going forward?
Main purpose of governance of trade, such as with the WTO going forward, should be to enable societies really to realize their aspirations. So when we talk about the WTO of the future, what we're talking about is a WTO that is responsive to the challenges of climate change, food insecurity, global health issues. Without those, there is no future, there's no WTO of the future.